Hi friends, welcome to Chapter 6, the audience analysis. So in this presentation, we'll be covering the characteristics of the audience, analyzing the audience. We'll discuss the core 5 demographic information categories that we should look at or consider when developing our speeches, how to assess the speech setting, and adapting to audience analysis information. So when we are developing our speeches this semester and in the future, we should always take this audience-centeredness approach to developing our speeches. And that is keeping the audience foremost in mind at every step of the speech, preparation, and the presentation. So we know that good speakers have a desired response from their audience. So like when you are planning out your speeches, you want some sort of desired response from your audience members. So how can we ensure that that desired response is achieved? Well, we do that by understanding the audience. And one predominant way we understand the audience is by collecting information from the audience. So this might be survey data, polling data, basic demographic data to really understand who is it that will be in my audience and how can I identify with them or create a bond with them to establish commonalities. And so this last little bit of this last bullet point is this process of identification and where the speaker seeks to create the bond with an audience to emphasize commonalities related to values, goals, and expectations. And so how can we do that? How can we make sure that we're effective in creating that bond with our audience members? And so, the short answer is obviously an audience analysis. But even before we begin an audience analysis, we first have to think about to whom am I talking to or speaking to? Who's going to be in my audience? Is this a bunch of fifth graders or is this a college classroom with a diverse group of students who come from different backgrounds, different majors, all that stuff. The second thing we want to ask is, what do I want the audience to know, believe, or do as a result of my speech? So you want to take into consideration at the end of the speech, what do you want your audience members to know? Or maybe even in your persuasive speech, what do you want the audience to do right after you attempted to persuade them? What's going to be their course of action that you want them to take? The third question is, what is the most effective way of composing and presenting my speech to accomplish that aim? So quite a few semesters ago, I had a student try to persuade us to eliminate the use of plastic straws. And, obviously, like the student was, arguing that we should place a ban on the production and the selling of plastic straws, and that every restaurant or even Starbucks avoids all of these straws. Now, I know a lot of these companies have already adopted that mindset and that policy. So again, just to remind you, this speech was a long time ago. But in order to really persuade us to stop using straws in our own personal lives, the student used really strong emotional appeals. And so, the student showed us a picture of a turtle with a plastic straw shoved in its eye. And the student said, we use a straw for what, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, depending on how quickly you consume your drink, and then you throw it away. Well, the chances of that straw becoming a piece of litter and getting, polluted in the ocean and having a direct effect on the health and the well-being of our wildlife should be enough to break the habit of using plastic straws. And so this was one way of, trying to compose a message, trying to, achieve that end result of not using plastic straws. And so this student, used those strong emotional appeals. So for the speech topic you might be talking about, that might not work. Maybe really laying out the evidence or explaining the logic behind a particular process might be more effective than just simply, trying to appeal to the emotions of the audience. So keep that in mind, that, you want to consider what's the most effective way in presenting the speech to accomplish the end result. So what is the psychology of the audience? I think it's important to understand that first, the audience is not compelled to listen to us as speakers. And oftentimes people are programmed to be indifferent to us as speakers. Now, they're indifferent in terms of maybe they don't really care. And so it's our sole responsibility as speakers is to really bring them into the conversation and show them why they should care. So this is because people hear what they want to hear and disregard the rest. Most audience members are egocentric in terms of they're really only there to listen to information that's going to benefit them or to help them. And so we have to be able to communicate that. So really it's our job as speakers to, communicate in a way that makes the audience invest their time and their attention into what we have to say. And so, one way we do this is through emotional appeals. Okay, so the audience is going to be the egocentric, and this is where an audience pays attention to messages that affect their own values, beliefs, and well-beings. Essentially, in every class that you've probably taken or, a lecture you've paid attention to, chances are you were asking this why question, or, what's in it for me? Why is this important to me? What's the most relevant information that I need to know to become successful on an exam, right? And so we really are only invested in ourselves. I know that's a very grim way of putting it, but your audience members aren't going to be any different. They're going to be looking at you giving a speech and asking why should I care? What's important here? How is this information going to impact me or benefit me? And so we have to really make sure that we communicate clearly to the audience why this is. So let's take a look at this audience analysis. And this is essentially the process of gathering information about your audience. It could be the attitudes, general evaluations of people, ideas, and objects. So what type of attitudes do the people have towards your topic? Do they have a positive attitude, or is it neutral, or do they have a negative attitude about your topic? It could be also beliefs, the ways in which people perceive reality. It could also be their values, like what do people value? So some of the demographic information that we should collect based on our audience is age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. This might include income, occupation, educational level. It could be, maybe religion, political affiliation, gender, or sexual orientation. So really gathering this information can help us tailor our topic to a certain extent. Now, just, collecting basic categorical information doesn't allow us to make any strong predictions on how the audience is going to respond to our topic. Or maybe, take, for example, someone's socioeconomic status. That does not communicate their ability to be able to process complex information. Or even educational level, I hate to say it, but, just because people have an education doesn't necessarily mean they're super smart or intellectual. So we want to avoid stereotypes when collecting demographic information, is because that could actually hinder us from becoming effective in delivering our speeches. So, while demographic categorical data may help us make some sort of changes in the speech that we choose and how we approach the audience, it doesn't give us a complete picture. And so, you might use more continuous type of data to assess your audience. And so this might include, hobbies or maybe interest levels. Like if you were going to be giving a speech on tennis, right? You might say on a scale of 1 to 7, how interested are you in tennis? And if 90% of your audience is like below a 3, so that means like they're in the 1 to 2 range where it's like they aren't really interested, then you're going to have to really tailor and adapt your topic in a way that's going to make it interesting to an audience that's probably not really interested in listening to you. And so we could look at hobbies, family statistics, interests, also the level of information the audience knows about our speech. So these are some, things that we could do to gather more information about the audience and, again, how we can tailor our speech. The next is assessing the audience's disposition to a topic. So, is this new to the audience? Is our topic like groundbreaking information? Or do they know a lot about the topic that we're speaking on? So again, this is one way to assess, to what extent do you share complex information with the audience, or do you start with the fundamentals? So this disposition could also include negative attitudes. So are the audience members potentially hostile or judgmental about you and your topic? Or do they have a positive attitude? Are they a captive audience? So, is it a bunch of college students who are taking a public speaking class and are forced to listen to our presentations? Or are they completely voluntary? Are these people, showing up to maybe our TED Talk, right? So ways of gathering information include surveys. This is audience analysis with demographic information. It's mostly just categorical, fill in the box type information. Surveys could also be continuous type or interval type data. So, you could create a survey that says, how likely are you, going to watch Netflix tonight? On a scale of 1 to 7, with no little to no time to a lot of time, how likely are you going to spend your time on Netflix, or how many hours per week, right? What type of shows do you listen to? And then you can start developing your topic based on this information. Interviews, you could seek out expert firsthand knowledge. So you can conduct interviews to gain further information about your audience members. So you could either conduct a focus group to figure out what's relevant to them. I've done this in the past with past students who have taken earlier versions of the courses that I teach. So the few first semesters that I taught, starting at Cal State Fullerton, I administered surveys and asked them, questions like, how did you enjoy this class? What really sucked about this class? What was one thing that worked well? What are some advice? And then, the last day of class, we had a breakout session, and I shared with them, especially the first semester I started teaching, I shared with them, like, look, this is my first time teaching. I want to grow in this, so please, share this information. So you could do interviews. You could also seek out experts on the topic that you're speaking on to gather further information to use as references. But we'll approach that in a different chapter when we talk about researching. And then investigate, research published sources or academic articles. So you could look at, demographic information or other public records to figure out, how you can tailor your topic to fit the audience needs. Okay, so moving on to assess the speech setting. This is the rhetorical situation. We talked about, at the beginning of the speech, you want to figure out, who's the audience, who's the speaker, what's the message, overall, what is the purpose of the speech. Now, more specifically, you want to start assessing the physical settings of your speech. So this might be the setting, the physical location, and the occasion. How are you going to be approaching your audience? Are you on some sort of stage with a microphone and your audience is, in, the stadium seats? Or, is it a classroom where you're going to be more close and personal with them? So is it going to be outside, inside, time of day, right? So all of this time, you want to consider the length of presentation and time of day. Is this a 45-minute formal address? Or is this, a 6-minute presentation where you're trying to convince the audience of something? You want to figure out the audience size, the estimated number of the audience in that speech. So is this going to be a group of 600, 6,000, and so forth, right? Typically, the less audience members there are, the more personal you can make your message. And as that number grows, the more formal you get with your presentation. You want to take in consideration technology, what's available and is it reliable? You want to take in consideration other speakers, the nature of the speaker's topic, right? So, what order are you in the lineup? So if you're at some sort of symposium or speech event where there's 5 speakers ahead of you, and they're all speaking on topics that maybe are counter to your topic, then you might take that into consideration and figure out how to overcome maybe those obstacles. Okay, so typically, in class we do this activity where I ask students to get into groups, and they, based on this just hypothetical demographic information, figure out how to develop a specific purpose, and a message to follow these demographic information. So, if let's say the topic was data encryption, and you were giving the speech to an audience that contained 50% of computer science majors, with 30% of your audience members holding some sort of physics degree and 20% of the fine arts majors. How would you adapt your topic to fit this audience demographics? Or audience 2, where you have 40% business majors, 40% history majors, and only 20% computer science majors. So again, how would you adapt this topic of data encryption to fit the audience? So audience 1, because predominantly they're computer science majors, they're probably there to gain deeper knowledge about their field. And so data encryption, you would tailor that speech to really reach out to the majority of your audience. Now, you might sprinkle in a little bit of fluff to bring in the fine arts major into your conversation, because again, these people, presumably don't know anything about data encryption. And so you would want to invite them in and give them some content that they can appreciate during your speech. Now, with audience 2, think about business majors. So one way you could tailor this topic is really looking at data encryption in terms of, why it's important for business majors to consider. We've seen major companies and organizations get hacked. Our consumer data has been stolen and sold to who knows who, and so that reflects poorly on that organization. Beginning of this year, Zoom bombing was taking place, where, people's Zoom lectures were getting hacked, where people were, interrupting these Zoom sessions and trolling. And so again, how does data encryption allow us to protect us against these things? So again, with the audience 2, we might develop our topic that takes a different approach. With the history majors, we might give a brief history of the progression of data encryption and maybe case studies in history that relate to businesses being hacked or, having their data breached. And then, of course, for the 20% of the computer science majors, we could, offer them something in our speech as well. So this is a little bit how we could adapt our audience, adapt our speech to the audience's demographic and dispositions. Again, this is just another scenario that I invite students to work in groups to figure out, again, how they can adapt this topic to fit these audience demographics. So as we finish up chapter 6, make sure that you read the chapter and you really think to yourself when you're selecting a topic, when you're researching a topic, when you're developing a speech, who's in my audience? What is it? What's that end goal that I want to accomplish at the end of my speech? And what's going to be the best way to communicate to the audience this information? That's it for this time, and we'll see you next time.